Professor Emeritus Sir Errol Walrond, this evening's author for the book launch. Professor Emeritus Sir Henry Fraser, previous Dean of the Faculty of Medical Sciences, the triple accredited Faculty of Medical Sciences, Cave campus. Dean Peter Adams, Director of the George Allen Chronic Disease Research Center, Professor Simon Anderson, joining us online. Campus Librarian, Ms. Judith Toppin. Faculty of Medical Sciences colleagues, including Deputy Dean of Preclinical Sciences, Dr. Damien Cohall. Specially invited guests, staff and students of the Cave campus, colleagues joining us online from our sister campuses, St. Augustine, Mona Campus, Five Islands, and our largest campus, the Open Campus. Members of the online community and members of the media, good evening. Welcome to this book launch, here located at the E.R. Walrond building of the Clinical Skills Complex here in Martindale's Road, Barbados. This evening, we are launching a text entitled A Question of Ethics, Case Conferences in Everyday Ethical and Legal Issues. It is my pleasure to MC the evening's events. I am Kenneth Connell, the Deputy Dean of Internationalization and Recruitment in the Faculty of Medical Sciences. So, it is no coincidence that we are here in hopefully the end of a pandemic, in what might be described as strategic rationing of water resources at a national level. I will not say water outages, and possibly who knows what will come ahead in the season of challenges and new happenings. But let me just share a few thoughts with you. It is no coincidence that this book launch occurs in the Pathology Museum of the E.R. Walrond building. Quite recently, a group of not-so-nervous third-year students in an activity, we were speaking about names and the eponymous names that are characterized several of our clinical signs. Doctors like to put their names to everything. It gives them ownership. And sometimes, occasionally, diseases are named after patients. The students, of course, protested. Why no eponymous names? Because they don't give any insight into the condition. I would use an example from my specialty, internal medicine, the Rosier sign. Or maybe I should use a surgical example, given the author. I don't remember any. Maybe Gray-Turner's sign in pancreatitis. They could not put together what's the symbolism or the necessity, being millennials or zennials, of having names and names after conditions and clinical signs. I said to them, because I really didn't have a more intelligent response, we name things because we name things. And then I turned and said, we name things because we stand on the shoulder of giants, and we need to respect that. Why are we here in the E.R. Walrond building? Because we stand on the shoulder of one such giant, and we should respect that. I will now hand the podium over to Dean Adams to offer the welcome address.
Thank you, Dr. Connell. Professor Emeritus Sir Errol Walrond, Professor Emeritus Sir Henry Fraser, quite a few nights here today, Director of GACDRC, Professor Simon Anderson, Campus Librarian, Mrs. Judith Toppin, Deputy Dean, Dr. Cohall, FMS colleagues, specially invited guests, the UWTV audience. Good night. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this book launch, which, as the MC said, is fittingly taking place in the E.R. Walrond Clinical Skills Building. Professor Walrond, the author, is a former dean of the School of Clinical Medicine and Research. His tenure extended from 1976 to 1992, which includes my stint as an undergraduate medical student and also part of my time as a postgraduate student. Here at the SCMR, at the then SCMR. He was dean again from 1996 to 2001. I'm sure that's a record that's not going to be exceeded, because I looked at the statutes and ordinances, and this is quite a long time. Although as a surgeon, you spent much of the last 2 decades since retirement not only writing books, but educating students and doctors about ethical issues. Sir Errol published his first ethics book in 2005. I have in my collection an autographed copy of The Ethical Practice in Everyday Healthcare by Sir Errol. And I'm sure that this 2022 book will be just as good, if not better, and even more relevant. Sir Errol is well positioned to write about everyday ethical and legal issues, as the new book is titled. Over the last 20 plus years, he has been the lead resource person at monthly ethics conferences. Now, just think of how many ethical scenarios have been discussed during this time and how many ethical dilemmas solved during these conferences. So that's a wealth of experience for you. The book is necessary. Many ethical issues are involved in medical practice. Ethical training should be introduced early in the undergraduate medical education, but like everything else, it needs continuous reinforcement, including during the specialty training. At KFIL, we start ethics teaching from year 1 of the MBBS program. This is done during the Introduction to Medical Practice course, where we have lectures on ethical and legal issues, and also in case-based learning, where some of the scenarios would contain an ethical component. In year 4, we have the ethics teaching integrated into the psychiatry, ethics, and humanities clerkship. I think that's something Sir Henry would have started in his time. We were just trying to figure out how many years ago that was earlier today. Currently, the deans across the campuses are coming up with a plan to ensure that all campuses have a dedicated ethics clerkship of 2 weeks duration, and that the content covered is agreed upon among the campuses. While this is good, we are going one step further. As far as the final MBBS examinations are concerned, the campuses are currently seeking approval for an integrated final MBBS exam where medicine and therapeutics, surgery, and obstetrics and gynecology will be tested as a single entity. On its own, this is one of the most important and significant changes to the final exam structure ever done. A bigger change than the introduction of the medical and therapeutics OSCE, I dare say. But importantly, in the exam blueprint sent forward for approval, at least one of the 17 clinical stations at the exam must include an ethical issue. So ethics will be examined in final examinations. And of course, examinations to some extent drives learning and teaching. Some postgraduate programs also include ethics courses. The Diploma in DM Family Medicine has a module on medical ethics and the doctor-patient relationship. This module was introduced in 2004 when the postgraduate diploma in family medicine started. I was the program coordinator at the time and called on Professor Walrond to teach the module for the first few years. It was offered. Even though retired, he did so willingly, and the doctors benefited tremendously from his knowledge and experience. It is important that all postgraduate programs include structured ethics teaching to ensure that the objectives are attained. Ethics training for researchers is also important. In order to get ethical approval from our IRB headed by Dr. Mike Campbell, researchers must pass an ethics course and be recertified every 3 years. This reminds me that I must be recertified before the current IRB application I have submitted can be approved. It won't be approved otherwise. Ethical training for medical practitioners is important as it allows them to make sound decisions while keeping within the legal framework. The new book by Sir Errol is therefore timely and extremely relevant. Course and clerkship coordinators are urged to include it on their book list. And I understand for this, the 4th-year clerkship, it's already on the book list, but we need to get it in all the book lists. I look forward to hearing more about this book and subsequently reading it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Adams. So in modern medical education, it is quite easy to forget and to be tantalized with all of the dynamics of simulation teaching and the various pedagogical designs to make courses more attractive to the new practitioners or the future generation of practitioners. ethics somehow, when you look at it on the surface, may seem boring and abstract. And quite often when an ethics course or case is integrated into the instructional design of any course, the students kind of think, the first question in their mind is, will this count towards the final assessment? So to have the ethics course interwoven into the medical curriculum of the University of West Indies is important, because it really speaks to the whole core of our mission, which is to improve the lives and health of the people of our region in an ethical and compassionate way. We have a cadre of deans here, and I will call on one of them now, Professor Sir Henry Fraser, to the podium.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. It really is a pleasure to be here, and it is a pleasure to see this sequel to the original book, because I was always bothered as a medical student by the problems that arose constantly when I was an acting house officer on Don Christian's firm at the University Hospital of the West Indies, and I had to deal as an acting house officer, a medical student at the beginning of my final year, with ethical issues that were horrendous. And Don Christian, of course, gave all the help that he could, but we recognized as students and as the team that there wasn't formal teaching on any of these issues. And really, ethical issues have been a neglected aspect of the medical career, a neglected aspect of medicine and medical teaching in the Caribbean for a long time, and in Barbados in particular, until Sir Errol became passionate about it. And he really did become passionate about it. And one might ask, how come, of all the people in medicine, why was it that Mickey Walrond became passionate? Well, you know, Mickey's wonderful wife, Bev, was a brilliant lawyer. And she was a lawyer who, in terms of her specialty and her practice, I think there was a very human and humane aspect to her law practice. And so Mickey and Bev, living together, talking a great deal, in each other's company all the time. You know, the Bible says that a man and woman shall be joined together and the two shall be one flesh. And in truth and in fact, I think not only one flesh, but one mind. And so Bev's legal mind interacted with Mickey's professional mind. And I suspect, I've never really asked him this, I've always made the assumption, and he's possibly nodding gently, that Bev might have stimulated a lot of the passion, not just the domestic passion, but the passion about the subject of ethics. And so when I was dean, and I felt that something needed to be done about this, I was aware very much of Mickey's issues and passion with ethics. And his book came out at just around the same time that I was introducing a short-term clerkship in medical ethics, medical humanities, and personal development. And I thought that was innovative. And it came about at the time that I'd been commissioned to develop a new faculty in Barbados. And so it gave an opportunity for me and Mike Brandy and the folks in Trinidad to discuss curriculum harmonization. And so when we did that, we immediately made Mickey's new book, hot off the press, the textbook, the formal textbook, and I made sure that every student bought it, Mickey. So I don't know whether you ever got any royalties, because UE Press tends not to pay royalties. Don't quote me, please. But, but we made sure that it was the textbook, and I think it has been a tremendous book. And it really is wonderful to see this volume, because it's a magnum opus. It is a superb book with vast numbers of cases. I think the number I read was 200. And in the review that I wrote some time ago, when it was actually completed, in that review I commented on this extraordinary number of cases, and I suggested that it wasn't something to be read from stem to stern, but that people should pick it up, look through the contents, and find the titles of cases which resonate with them, cases which would ring a bell with them, cases that were familiar because they'd had an example of such a case, and then to read that case and read the discussion. So in a very real sense, this is a very practical book, which I think has tremendous value for all doctors, but not only for all doctors. It should be for the whole healthcare profession, because in my review, I made the point that supplies clerks refused to supply a prescribed stocking in a particular case, and because the supplies clerk didn't quite really see why it was relevant. And this sometimes happens with pharmacists who will query a doctor's prescription and say, I don't think that's a good idea, you should really try this. And in the old days when the drug service came into being, a doctor would prescribe a particular drug and the pharmacist would deliberately not stock the cheap generic that we in the drug committee had approved and say, well, we don't have that, it's not available, but here's the patent drug, which happened to cost 5 times as much. And so the point that Professor Walrond makes is that these cases require discussion. If the paramedic has a problem, then it should be discussed with the doctor. So without further ado, I think this is a fantastic book. I hope my review, I don't think my review was actually published at the time. I think you said hold it until the launch takes place. So I hope that that will come out fairly soon and that this book will be in the hands of every health professional in Barbados as soon as possible.
Thank you, Sir Henry. We've made a strategic change to the order to allow for arrivals. We will now have remarks from publisher Miss Margaret Hope and from Miss Sonia Mills.
I'm Margaret Hope, writer and publisher. I first met the dapper Sir Errol Walrond when I was introduced to him by my husband, simply as Mickey, in his consulting rooms at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Our first child had required surgery for a common childhood illness. His reputation had preceded him as a decent and person and brilliant surgeon. My daughter Anush, a name she shares with his daughter, was 5 at the time, and she's now in her 54th year, which indicates how long I have known him, and the pleasure it therefore gives me to participate in this book launch. As chairman of the AIDS National Advisor Committee, and in my capacity as Chief Information Officer, we were to work closely together. And I was so impressed by his creativity and clarity of thought, which I was to become even more impressed with in my capacity as CEO of the Arnold Cato Foundation for some 10 years, then as its secretary and at present as a board member. Years when he served as a board member and from 2012 as its chairman. I was so impressed by the quality of the man, his knowledge of medicine, Barbadian society, and the nuances of its mores, and by his writing skills, that after I published with my daughter our memoir of our lives as epileptics, I urged him to write his memoir and told him I would publish it. He told me he would. However, time passed, and one day after delicious lunch prepared by him, he's an excellent cook, after a CF management meeting at his home, he told me he had not written the memoir, but he had completed a document which he would like me to take a look at to see if it was something I would like to publish. I read it and fell in love with the stories captured in the case conferences on the ethical issues encountered and discussed by staff in a teacher format of a Caribbean hospital, cases and discussions that he had collected over an extended period. Thus began the journey of producing A Question of Ethics. I put together a team of Curtis Chandler, graphic artist and book designer of Genesis Graphics, Jamaican editor Sonny Mills, and Barbadian journalist and editor Carl Moore, and started the work with Mickey participating at every juncture, whether he was in Barbados, traveling, or suffering through the tragic loss of his wife. Words cannot describe the joy and pride that I felt when Curtis arrived at my home with the finished product hot off Cotswold Limited Press. I hope that this book fulfills its promise of improving the practice of medicine and ethical practice in the Caribbean, and enriches the lives and work of medical practitioners of today and tomorrow.
Good evening, friends. I had never met Professor Sir Errol Walrond when my friend Margaret Hope invited me to edit this work. But I too knew him by reputation. Mickey Walrond, eminent son of Barbados, long-standing son-in-law of Jamaica, brilliant surgeon, urbane Caribbean man, from that generation of us who had bought into and never sold out the concept of West Indian nation. It is always interesting to be introduced to a person through their writing, and to judge who they are by the style and content of the words they put on a page. In this instance, it was immediately obvious, just from the choice of cases, that the author was profoundly concerned by the question of ethics. And not only in medical ethics, nor in esoteric cases. The giveaway word is in the subtitle of the book: Everyday Ethical and Legal Issues. It was easy to tell that there was no separation in the author's mind between one's personal code of ethics and one's professional practice. And also, yes, ethics is everybody's business. So, the book, A Question of Ethics, will be thought-provoking reading for all, and in particular, for persons who well know that life is beset with ambivalence, ambiguities, anomalies, and that not every question has an absolute answer, yes or no. Technical terms and medical jargon sent me to Google a few times, but I believe friends and acquaintances will recognize Professor Walrond's voice and style and appreciate the book's accessibility. As a potential patient, which we all are, I was overwhelmed by the kind of ethical and legal issues which doctors are often forced to deal with before they could even administer treatment to the patient in front of them. And I was quite unsettled to contemplate how easy it could be to receive the wrong answer. By his careful choice and presentation of cases, Professor Walrond has managed to pose a question of ethics quite forcefully, so that the reader, be they medical practitioner or patient, can begin to grasp the fundamental importance of this question, which has engaged Professor Walrond's full attention for the past 5 decades. Ethical conduct is desirable in all professions, and in life, of course. But few professions are so burdened with the responsibility of taking life and death decisions for another person, and often urgently and immediately. I am sure that this work will serve as a guide to today's and tomorrow's medical professionals in their public and private lives, and it will enrich the legacy which generations of Caribbean scholars working in the field of medicine have left us. Congratulations, Nikki, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hope and Ms. Mills. The next on the program is our featured speaker, Professor Sir Errol Walrond. I will now call him to the podium to deliver brief remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dean, Sir Henry, thank you for your remarks. As you say, a long time ago, I was once a dean, and one of the things that I remember at that time was that ethics was taught, or rather I would say not taught, as I was when I was a medical student over 60 years ago. 60 years more ago, at medical school, thank you, there was the occasional lecture where the Hippocratic Oath was mentioned. And we were taught not to mention the patient's name when we were presenting cases. And we gave them the courtesy of mentioning their names at the bedside when we were presenting a case. But that was the only time we were allowed to do that. Otherwise, it was left to the teachers to tell us how to behave. And sometimes we never got anything about how to behave except follow me, and that was not always a good thing to do. Every now and again, as students, we got interested and would discuss perhaps some issue that came up in the newspapers, you know, where the doctor had been charged with something like doing an abortion, and they were caught and were prosecuted, and we would discuss that. But that's as far as we got. Now, when I was dean, I received a number of informal complaints that the young doctors were not really behaving as well and as ethical as the older doctors. I never got any real specifics about this. And I personally, I looked at the students and the young doctors, and I didn't see them as being any less principled than their teachers. But I realized that there was a disquiet out there among some of the public about this part of the curriculum. And so I decided to see if we could introduce a more organized approach to ethical teaching and conduct. Now, recognizing that all such teaching should involve all health personnel, I set about trying to establish 2 tracks in improving ethical conduct. One was to try and establish institutional mechanisms that could both guide ethical conduct, and the other was to establish some ethical teaching on the same basis as our most successful mode at the time. And I saw our most successful mode as the clinical case method. And therefore, we concentrated on that. Now, since then, as you've heard, the ethical teaching is a lot more extensively organized, and that's a good thing. This exploration of mine led to various committees being set up, and I must confess they were not widely successful. We had the problems that perhaps are still there today, where a number of people, and perhaps the older practitioners among us, do not feel that this is an important area until something happens to them and it hits the press. If they can keep it out of the press, then it doesn't matter. What did endure when we started the clinical case conference was, in fact, that particular aspect of it. Now, as you heard from Sir Henry, I was encouraged to produce a suitable textbook that would cover the field because there was simply no basic ethical text anywhere to be found. And I still don't find any, actually, when you look around. And that resulted in the publication of Ethics in Everyday Healthcare in 2005. And I had to illustrate some of the scenarios in that book with imaginary cases. And I was interested not long ago reading up on some of the literature that comes through on the internet, that one of the cases I made up about artificial insemination of donors and the doctor using his own sperm, I made it up, and it came to light. It is true. And in fact, almost the same thing that I made up has occurred, and the person is found himself almost in jail. So we do need to look at these things and to have that kind of teaching from the ground base up. Now, since then, I've collected, and this is over, certainly over 20 years and maybe 30 years or more, I've collected the case conferences on the issues encountered and discussed by the staff, and attempts by the organizers, and Dr. Emmanuel is the latest of those organizers, to involve people outside the hospital has not been widely successful, but occasionally we have been successful. And some of the cases in the book are cases that have been presented at another forum which I regularly attend, which is the Caribbean College of Surgeons annual meeting. One thing I am going to say, and I make no apology for saying it, there has been a notable absence of administrative personnel from the conferences, even when they have been intimately involved and when they have been invited to come and discuss their roles in the cases. This is a terrible pity, because I think that for good practice in any part of medicine, it must involve all of the persons in medicine administration, right through down to the person who cleans the rooms around the patient's bed. Everyone has to be involved. Nevertheless, in spite of that bit of negative comment there have been some staff members who have attended regularly and contributed to discussions along with the students. And sometimes the students are very active indeed in these discussions. Now, unfortunately, this book was completed before the COVID pandemic, so that if you're looking for any discussions of COVID cases in this book, it will not be there. It is a pity, but there we go. As you've heard, I think the book seeks to distill the issues raised at these case conferences, and I hope it illustrates some of the problems to be avoided and some of the problems that can be resolved in the management of our everyday cases. I'm grateful for all the work that's been put in by Ms. Margaret Hope, who offered to publish the work, and found the editors, Ms. Sonia Mills and Mr. Carl Moore, and the reviewers of the work. You've heard Professor Fraser. I hope you will hear Professor Griffith later on, and also another reviewer, Dr. Errol, who, interestingly enough, came from Jamaica when I organized the very first conference on ethical issues back in 1992. All right? And he came down from Jamaica as, I don't know if it was a representative or just someone very interested. And after that conference, he became sufficiently enthused that he went on to do an MSc and then a PhD in ethics. And he is now one of the ethical practitioners in the region. So I'm very grateful to the faculty for organizing this, and particularly you, Dr. Connell. And I hope that this launch in these most interesting of times will interest both our small attending audience and I hope a larger virtual audience. Thank you very much.
So interesting how the abbreviation BC changes meaning now to before COVID in our times. So members of the online and in-person audience, we will now have presentations from our reviewers, beginning with Professor Griffith, as well as members of senior campus administration, the principal, Professor Clive Landis, as well as Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles.
Professor Sir Errol Walrond has given us a new text on medical ethics that reflects his vast experience in the broad field of medicine. The book highlights his strong interest in how doctors maintain moral behavior during their interactions with patients and in their execution of clinical care. Throughout the book, his familiarity with the administrative tasks of running a medical faculty as its dean and his involvement in the leadership of a medical institution are palpable. The quality of the work is in keeping with his well-known contributions to academic medicine and to general healthcare throughout the Caribbean. It is remarkable that the format of this book, titled A Question of Ethics, it is based on his formal presentations and discussions of ethics dilemmas at a monthly case conference. The meetings were conducted in the General Caribbean Hospital over a period of several decades. I have had the good fortune to attend several of these exercises during the last few years. Their format, as I observed them, resembled what I have seen in other educational settings. Presentation by a physician familiar with the care of the concerned patient, formulation of the ethics dilemmas encountered in the clinical care, comments and observations from members of the multidisciplinary audience of caregivers, and a teaching exposition conducted by Professor Walrond with a final short discussion by the audience. Respect for patients, their families, and the caregivers was observed scrupulously and consistently. The structure of the text is clear and is maintained throughout its 339 pages. There are 14 chapters covering major topics in medical ethics. The first 4 chapters are entitled Consent, Confidentiality, Counseling, and Alternatives in Medicine. The next 4 consider what Professor Walrond calls to live or die, with subsections exploring matters of resuscitation and the last period of a patient's life, futility in care, professional conduct and risks, and allocation of resources. The final 6 chapters address ethics problems encountered in child abuse, patients at risk, such as the restraining of a patient and the impaired physician, criminal cases, culture and religion, legal jeopardy, in that case concerning, for example, religious refusal of blood transfusion, and finally, public health. Each chapter contains several subsections which represent specific subject areas, as I have already illustrated. All subsections start with one or several case reports presented as the stories of patients' encounters with the medical system during their struggles with disease. Here, both context and personal happenings come into view. then Waldron engages in what anthropologists like to call meaning making, the process of analyzing and making sense of the data provided in the case reports. This work takes place in the subsection he labels issues raised. His discussion of these thorny matters at times is presented as a response to an ethics question, or he affirms clearly an ethics principle that emerges from the discussion. At other times, there is the weighing of alternative solutions to a particular dilemma without a sharpened recommendation. But even then, he's careful to clarify what may be considered universally wrong as opposed to what may be occasionally acceptable behavior if certain conditions are met. Experienced clinician teachers like Walrond instinctively recognize that finding solutions to ethics dilemmas is not a simple black or white process. William Darby and Robert Weinstock have recently been writing about this subject. They discussed the task that we all have of trying to do the right or most ethical action when faced with challenges. That is why they have advanced a model of principlism to help us when we are faced with conflicting duties and opposing principles. It is no accident that this model has in turn generated substantial debate. That flows from the understandable argument that militates against any facile conclusions concerning moral behavior in a specific culture. Edmund Pellegrino has explored this interaction between culture and bioethics in one of his penetrating essays. In a similar vein, Maisha Emanuel and Michael Campbell have discussed how medical ethics may be influenced by factors operating in a culture influenced by a lack of economic resources. Navneet Sidhu and Philip Candilis have reminded us too that feminism is also a powerful element that conditions reactions to ethics problems. Consequently, Professor Walrond discusses the cases with appropriate caution and deference in a generally lucid, thoughtful, and clinically astute fashion. He eschews moral absolutism and arrogance. This is important, as clinicians do not always appreciate how competing interests manifest themselves in clinical work. For example, medical caregivers may be tempted to support the interests of the organized care system while diluting the voice of the patient. The explosion of human rights as a broad political imperative across the globe calls for corresponding recognition of patients' rights in medical education and medical care. Thus, I hope that this important book will lead to more interdisciplinary presence at the case conferences referenced in this work. As Professor notes in the preface, in addition, all caregivers must understand that familiarity with the professional ethics that undergird our work is a foundation that supports high quality in our caregiving. It is also the best sign that we believe in the inherent dignity of our patients. Professionals from all disciplines engaged in the provision of medical care in the Caribbean should read this book. It should also be a reference text in medical student ethics courses. Administrators interested in the complexity of moral behavior in clinical contexts will also find it helpful. Thank you.
A pleasant good evening and a very warm welcome to you all. I am delighted to be part of this virtual launch for Professor Errol Waldron's latest book, A Question of Ethics, Case Conferences in Everyday Ethical and Legal Issues. Professor Walrond has dedicated much of his life's work to the development of medical practice in the region, by expansion of medical training, the establishment of specialist postgraduate training, and by being scientific secretary to the region's Medical Research Council. But it is his concept of ethical conduct that has forged his philosophy of life and career. Most of what he does, as he quite often says, is deeply rooted in the fundamental belief that fairness to all is the platform on which the practice of medicine should be based. This foundational belief led to his first publication on ethics, Ethics in Everyday Healthcare, in 2005. But true to his nature, Professor Waldron had more to offer on this topic, and has since been collecting case conferences on matters of medical ethics experienced in a general hospital in the Caribbean. The current book title, A Question of Ethics, Case Conferences in Everyday Ethical and Legal Issues, is quite appropriate, given the world's current volatile state, which requires quick and agile responses in policies, procedures, regulations, programs, and activities, while maintaining a standard of ethics to ensure fairness to all. The current COVID-19 pandemic required policymakers, professions, and organizations to find the delicate balance between saving lives and saving livelihoods, without making the kind of trade-off that was injurious to one or the other. When I published an ethics handbook with Dr. Anna Perkins, an ethicist from the Mona campus, entitled Ethics Amidst COVID-19, it was done with this balance in mind and to encourage ethical commitment and action among those who have a responsibility to make rules and impose policies that affect the lives of nations and peoples. During the height of the pandemic, most countries were faced with the dilemma of protecting public health through national shutdowns or maintaining economic activity. In the end, most countries did opt for national shutdowns, with only limited operations permitted for essential industries. Though enacted in the interest of public health, many families were severely impacted by these restrictions, leading to loss of household incomes, loss of educational opportunities, and other lost opportunities that disproportionately affected the most vulnerable in society, such as migrants, women, children, and the elderly. Essentially then, the prevailing intention of highlighting the importance of ethics is that whether at the level of public health or individual health, ethics should not be dismissed in times of crisis. Under such circumstances, ethical considerations and accountability are indeed more important, not less. For those in the medical profession who encounter crises almost daily, the issue of ethics is more pervasive and immediate. Ethical dilemmas surround issues of consent, confidentiality, counseling, alternatives to medicine, futility in care, and professional conduct. And if left in a general silo, runs the risk of being abstracted and ignored. However, case studies of specific instances of parental refusal to treat a child, reporting of domestic abuse, pregnancy and a flawed fetus, do not resuscitate orders, and discontinuing of life support bring into sharp focus ethical considerations as immediate and relevant, not only for instruction and learning, but for the advancement of current medical practice. Using his vast medical expertise and visionary perspective, Professor Waldron has compiled key case studies to crystallize the major ethical and legal issues of the day facing medical practitioners, and to bring these to wider exposure and analysis. Simply presented and easy to read, A Question of Ethics, Case Conferences in Everyday Ethical and Legal Issues is certain to prove an invaluable resource for practitioners in the field, whether students or established professionals, in identifying the ethical thread that runs through the medical profession in daily practice. Professor Waldron has done the medical fraternity a great service in using real-life scenarios to illustrate the realities of healthcare and the moral dilemmas and choices faced by healthcare providers in the Caribbean. Professor Waldron, congratulations again for another inspiring work. You are truly an invaluable treasure to the medical profession, and I thank you.
What a tremendous honor it is for me to participate in the launch of this excellent book by Professor Mickey Walrond. Professor Walrond has been a mentor and friend for many decades. I have seen his mind at work close up. He is the quintessential scholar, the professional trailblazer, a doyen of his medical discipline. His latest book, A Question of Ethics, is excellent. And it is excellent for many specific and related reasons. It is timely. The urgency of now is reflected upon the text that we are here launching today. It is relevant to all of the major discourses that are contained within the research and the publishing surrounding the many disciplines of medicine. And critically and importantly, it contains the text of thousands of experiences and reflections of the author. I can say with full confidence that this is the work of an intellectual, but an intellectual who is committed to the public causes surrounding him as an intellectual. It contains the strategies and the thoughts of a committed scholar who wishes to promote the advancement and the best practices of his profession. This book, then, A Question of Ethics, explores the major and most significant issues, such as justice for citizens and patients, fairness in the treatment of all of those within the medical expectation. It deals with questions such as the management and choices that have to be made in circumstances of crisis. Professor Walrond was deeply embedded in these discourses and practices around the AIDS and HIV pandemic. He has been the surgeon extraordinaire at the UWI medical faculty for decades. In addition to his faculty practice, both intellectual and clinical, our author has been the chair of the Barbados Medical Council, and the respect shown to him by his peers enable him to emerge as the founding president of the Caribbean College of Surgeons. There can be no finer and more experienced mind, therefore, to explore the ethical and legal issues of everyday medical practices. This book contains the predicaments and the discourses, the choices, the options associated with high-level philosophical issues. Philosophical issues that intersect best practice within the profession, but also to the jurisprudence of life and how a profession intersects with the philosophy and jurisprudence. The big themes, for example, the divisive choices surrounding issues such as the giving of consent, the celebration and the protection of confidentiality, the counseling of patients and their families and loved ones within very complex medical circumstances, how and when to engage patients and their loved ones in the discourse of alternative medicine. How should professionals in making complex decisions, how should they conduct themselves, and what is an acceptable level of risk? And arguably, most importantly, the issues surrounding the choice of how a profession can engage in choices surrounding living and dying. This is a work to be read by every member of the medical community. We know the challenges that practitioners face both in the area of public health management, public health care, and research. We know there are challenges about the ethics of scientific research in some circumstances. Ethics, for example, surrounding the interface of technology and humanity. This is a book written by a quintessential intellectual who has engaged in the practice and in the reflection of these very important choices. It is a work, therefore, that touches not only those involved in the medical profession, but every citizen in a society that cares about the process of healthcare. It's a book, therefore, that deals at the deepest level with the critical and relevant issues of today, those pressing issues that all of us have to adjudicate, participate, and celebrate the advancement when the results are obvious. And importantly, it is the product, this work, this monograph. It is a product of one who is the best and brightest among us. It's a celebration, therefore, simultaneously of an intellectual construction, but it's also a celebration of the mind that has produced it. It has been for me a tremendous honor to participate in its launch by the utterance of these brief remarks. Thank you, Professor Walrond, and congratulations.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a little cold, hence why my voice is sounding a little shaky, but I'm thawing out here now. As you know, no event can be successful without the people who devote their energy and resources just to ensure that everything is just perfect. And so my job simply is to thank everybody who has been involved in bringing this event to fruition this evening. First of all, Vice Chancellor Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, thank you for your kind words of support and your insightful comments. He's not here, but I'm hoping he will hear these thank yous at a later date. Principal Professor Clive Landis for his very thought-provoking comments about the new text. Dean Adams from the Faculty of Medical Sciences, thank you for your very warm welcome remarks and your insights about the new things to come. The work I have to do, the new work to come. Thank you. Professor Emeritus Sir Errol Walrond, the man of the hour. You have succeeded in providing medical students, clinicians, hopefully administrators, Prof, with another easy-to-read text that covers this most important topic of medical ethics and the law. I have had the pleasure over the last 14 years, I counted it today, of being in attendance and coordinating the ethics conference. It has really been absolutely wonderful hearing the stories of the patients and working out how best to approach these issues when they come up. So seeing it now in writing is even better for all of us who are involved in that process. So thank you, Prof, very much. As Kenneth said earlier, my students have to use the text as a reference on the Psychiatry and Ethics Clerkship. Professor Emeritus Sir Henry Fraser, thank you for your insightful comments as well, and Professor Emeritus Ezra Griffith for his generosity of time and words. Dr. Kenneth Connell, Chief Cook and Bottle Washer for this event. Thank you for planning and organizing and conducting this evening's proceedings. To the Office of the Dean in the faculty, thank you for your sponsorship and support. Markham has done a wonderful job marketing and providing the promotional material for this evening. Thank you. In place for the stage setup and site preparation. As you heard, this is usually our pathology museum. That's the intended purpose. So it's done a good job in transforming it into this venue for tonight. To the medical library for significant administrative support. In particular, we want to recognize Ms. Janine Knight, who is our medical librarian, for all of her hard work for tonight. The campus bookshop at the back for the wonderful book display and sales set up for this evening. Just a plug here, everybody should get a copy on your way out of this text. And of course, the campus security for keeping us safe during these proceedings. Finally, thank you to the audience, small audience here, but also online, for making this book launch so special with your presence. Good night, everyone, and have a safe journey home. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Emmanuel. Don't tune out from your screens, because we want to invite you now to witness the official book signing of the text with the Dean of the Faculty of Medical Sciences, Dr. Peter Adams, and the author, Professor Sir Errol Walrond. On stage, join us. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings to an end this evening's proceeding at the E.R. Walrond building with Sir E.R. Walrond in the audience for this evening's book launch. The title of the book is A Question of Ethics, Case Conferences in Everyday Ethical and Legal Issues. Get your copy. Is an e-copy available? So an e-copy is available for those of you, I'm not going to say medical students, who are averse to hard copies. Get your e-copy so that you can turn the pages virtually. It has been a pleasure bringing this evening's book launch to you. Travel safely home, and enjoy the rest of your evening.